Oh, okay. So I think we're ready to go. So welcome all. On behalf of the High Seas Alliance, we'd like to welcome everyone from around the world for joining our webinar called The New High Seas Treaty, How Youth Can Help Protect Half the Planet. We know that it's very early or very late for some of you, and we are grateful for you guys joining regardless. It's great to see so many young people that want to see a healthy ocean in the future. Before we begin, I want to let you know that the webinar is being recorded and there will be a live stream interpretation from English to Spanish throughout. So to access the live interpretation, you must go to the panel at the bottom of your screen and click on interpretation and then choose the Spanish channel. Other housekeeping things just before we get started, during the discussion portion of the webinar or through the presentations, please use the Q&A function to pose any questions you have or that pop into your mind. Or if you'd like to speak, please write your name in the chat box or use the raise your hand button and then we can unmute you. So my name's Travis Ayton. I'm with the High Seas Alliance. And if you're unaware of who the High Seas Alliance is and what we do, we're an alliance of 40 plus ocean and climate NGOs from around the world working on protecting the high seas, our global commons, meaning the high seas belong to everyone and no one at the same time. So particularly, we've been working to finalize a new treaty for the conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So we know this is a long name, but it's otherwise known as the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Treaty, so the BBNJ Treaty, or more simply known as the High Seas Treaty. We're really excited to have you all here so we can talk about the treaty, as it's one of the few treaties currently being negotiated at the United Nations and the only treaty to be negotiated for the ocean in over 25 years. We think this webinar is really important because youth voices have been conspicuously absent from the treaty negotiations up until this point, and we want to make sure that you guys are represented. With the final negotiation session planned for 2021 and few countries stepping up to push for a strong treaty, we need to make sure we have all hands on deck to ensure that we secure a treaty that has all the tools we need to achieve a healthy planet for future generations. So our agenda for today will be as follows. Our first presenter will provide an overview of the high seas, where and what they are and why they matter. And then our second presenter will provide an overview of the treaty negotiations and what the new treaty aims to do for the ocean and the planet. We'll spend the second half of the webinar listening to you guys and answering your questions, learning more about your work, your interest in ocean conservation, ideas for becoming more involved in the treaty process, and how to create effective change in the high sea space. We will also be unveiling some opportunities for youth to become more involved through the work of the High Seas Alliance. So those are very exciting, and we're excited to unveil those to you. And then just before we get started again, as a reminder, if any question pops into your head throughout the webinar, please just post it in the chat function and we will answer it to the best of our ability. So I'd now like to introduce our first presenter, Lauren Kubiak, who is a senior policy analysis in the Oceans Division at the Natural Resource Defense Council and a member of the High Seas Alliance. So I'm just going to stop sharing my screen here. And Lauren, you should be good to go. The floor is yours.
Great. Thanks so much, Travis, and thanks everyone for joining. I'm really excited to be here and be able to talk about one of my favorite topics, the high seas, and why it's so important. So looks like I'm sharing my screen. Great, love it when things work out well. So yeah, I'm going to be talking about the high seas and why they're so important as a planetary life support system. So first, we're going to start off by talking about what are the high seas and where are they. So the high seas are all of the ocean that's outside of any one country's national jurisdiction. So that's further than 200 nautical miles from shorelines. And if you look at the bottom right map, all that dark blue is the high seas, areas beyond national jurisdiction. And it's a huge amount of ocean, as you can see from that map. It makes up about 2/3 of our ocean and almost half the planet. And as Travis said, because it's international waters and it's a global commons, it belongs to everyone and nobody at the same time. So for a long time, people thought that the high seas didn't really have a lot of life in it, but we're finding out that that's quite wrong. It's one of the largest reservoirs of biodiversity on the planet. Its surface area covers about half of the planet, but when you include depth in the entire volume, it's over 90% of occupied habitat for life on Earth, and marine life like sharks and whales migrate through it, going from feeding grounds to breeding grounds to spawning grounds and back again. And in addition to sharks and whales, it's also important habitat for albatross, dolphins, tuna, and many, many more types of species. And in addition to the water column and surface waters, the deep ocean is also a huge reservoir of biodiversity with lots and lots of undiscovered species. So more people have been to outer space than the deep ocean. The deep ocean is 11 kilometers deep at its deepest, which is about 2 kilometers deeper than Mount Everest is high. And so far, only about 0.0001% of the deep sea floor has been studied. And almost every time scientists go down there on an exploratory mission, they find new species. It's estimated that there are millions of species down there that haven't been discovered yet. And every time a new species is discovered, that just adds to our understanding of global biodiversity. And these marine creatures could also have big impacts for creating new medicines and just helping us understand life on Earth better. And they're also, some of these corals are over 1,000 years old, and some of the most unique, longest lived, most vulnerable to disturbance species live in the deep sea. In addition to the marine life that depends on a healthy ocean, also 3 billion people depend on marine and coastal biodiversity for their livelihoods. So that's everyone from people who fish and dive companies, tourism companies, snorkel companies, and kind of everything in between. There's a lot of people who rely on marine and coastal biodiversity and a healthy ocean for their livelihoods. And this is more than just the high seas, but everything is connected. So for the ocean to be healthy, it's important that the high seas are healthy. And the high seas and ocean overall also play a hugely important role in the climate system. So the ocean produces about half of oxygen in the atmosphere, and in addition has played a huge role in mitigating some of the worst impacts of climate change. So since the 1970s, the ocean has absorbed over 90% of excess heat from climate change and about 1/4 of carbon dioxide emissions. So without the ocean, you can imagine that as bad as climate change is starting to get, it would be much worse if the ocean weren't there providing that service of preventing climate change from being much worse. But while it's been able to perform this role, it's also suffered from this role. So oceans are getting hotter and more acidic. Carbon dioxide uptake makes the ocean more acidic, and that makes it hard for calcifying organisms like corals and certain types of planktons to survive. And the hotter ocean causes coral bleaching. It causes fish to migrate toward the poles, and all of the climate impacts are just putting stress on marine species. In addition to climate threats, there are other human activities that are threatening the high seas. So overfishing is the biggest driver of biodiversity loss. About 1/3 of fish stocks are overfished, and fishing is causing the largest biodiversity declines in the ocean. And it's estimated that almost 1/3 of marine mammals are at risk of extinction, and over 1/3 of sharks and shark relatives and reforming corals are at risk of extinction. And in addition to overfishing, certain types of fishing methods are quite damaging, like bottom trawling, which destroys the bottom ecosystem and just pulls up everything in the net's path. And pollution is also a big problem: plastic pollution, chemical pollution, noise pollution, and all these things on top of climate change are just putting a lot of stress on the ocean and the biodiversity that lives in it, and threatening the ocean's ability to continue acting as a life support system. But luckily, there is an effort going on to address some of these threats. So the whole reason that we're here at this webinar, governments are currently at the United Nations, well, not physically now, but virtually, but governments are negotiating a treaty to address threats in the high seas and to better conserve and sustainably use marine biodiversity in areas beyond national jurisdiction. So my colleague Nicola will be talking more about the treaty and the treaty process, so I'll stop there, but just want to say that right now is a critical time to engage in the treaty process, and youth raising their voices, raising your voices in support of a strong treaty, in support of healthy oceans, couldn't be more important. So I'm thrilled you're here and looking forward to our discussion. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Travis.
Awesome, Lauren. Thank you so much for the great presentation. And yeah, I think you really just kind of highlighted that something like the high seas that make up almost half the planet, or 64% of the ocean, are actually is essential to ensure the rest of the planet's healthy, right? So we got to make sure that we can get a new treaty that gives us the tools to make the right changes to how we manage activities out there. So now I'd like to introduce our second speaker of the webinar, Nicola Clark, who is the Principal Associate with the Life on the High Seas team at the Pew Charitable Trust, who is also a member of the High Seas Alliance. So Nicola will provide an overview of the treaty negotiations and what they entail. So Nicola, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Travis. And thank you so much to all of you for joining on a weekend. That's dedication. So really glad that you guys could be with us today. So I'll jump right in, and I don't really need to spend too much time talking about what the high seas are, since Lauren did such a great job of talking about that. So I'm really going to be focusing this presentation on why we need a new treaty and giving a little bit more of a deep dive into what the negotiations for the BB&J treaty have looked like so far. Of course, we have areas beyond national jurisdiction. This is sort of what the legal regime looks like, right? So you've got the high seas are the areas of the water column that begin 200 nautical miles from shore. So up to 200 nautical miles, countries sort of get to treat that almost like their own national territory, almost. And then beyond that is the high seas. And then so it's a similar situation for the sea floor. The part of the sea floor that goes beyond national jurisdiction is all part of this broad area that we call areas beyond national jurisdiction. And so then looking at, this is a great slide that I think really just summarizes a lot of the key points that Lauren spoke about, but I think it's really helpful. I always just like looking at the map because it really just leaves you with the impression of how big the high seas are, how much space on the planet these areas beyond national jurisdiction take up. And it's crazy to me that there's not a sort of single treaty to sort of help manage all of the resources that are therein, which is what we're trying to work on during this. And so there are so many different activities, lest I think that there's maybe this mistaken impression that the high seas are some sort of barren wasteland where there's not a lot going on. Maybe it's just sort of blue as far as the eye can see, but really there's so much going on in the high seas. Again, as Lauren's already demonstrated, that there's so much life that's happening there, but there's also a lot of human activity that's happening there. There's fishing, there's mining, there's all sorts of, and there's shipping that's happening all over the high seas. Not to mention all sorts of new and emerging activities that are taking place there. As we look forward for different solutions to our problems, a lot of those solutions are taking place on the high seas. And increasingly, the institutions that do govern them either don't coordinate with each other, don't do a super great job governing them to begin with, or maybe don't exist. There are a number of activities that are sort of, it's the Wild West when it comes to the high seas. So at the moment, this is just a really short picture of some of the organizations that have to do with manage some aspect of the high seas. So you have one organization that deals with mining, another organization that deals with shipping, and then special protocols that deal with waste from shipping. There's one agreement that deals with fishing in the high seas, but it doesn't actually manage the high seas. Instead, all of these organizations called regional fisheries management organizations manage those different, and that's even divided further up by what type of fish stock, where the fish are. Then there are other sorts of organizations that deal with some sort of conservation aspect, but they don't really have often a lot of power to do much of anything, especially in the high seas. So really don't want to spend too much time on this, as much as just leave the impression that there's a lot of different organizations that are out there, but it's really fragmented and divided in terms of how they govern. It's a disjointed, fragmented effort with a lot of gaps that need to be filled if we want to actually successfully manage the high seas, especially when it comes to conservation. So the High Seas Treaty is meant to be a solution to this problem. And it's actually been a lot, and while we are looking at hopefully the final round of negotiations taking place soon in 2021, this idea for a High Seas Treaty has been a long time in the making. So in fact, there very well may be some of you who were just born, or maybe even hadn't been born yet when people first started thinking about a High Seas Treaty. So that really, the idea sort of came about in 2002, and the first meetings started happening in 2006. And it's only after this very long, almost 20-year road that we are finally in formal treaty negotiations, and hopefully the actual final round of the treaty negotiations. So the final negotiation was actually supposed to take place in the spring of 2020, so this past March, but of course that was right around the time that COVID really exploded, and so it's been postponed until 2021, looking like August of 2021. And so just to give a little bit of a glimpse, in case you guys want it, because we don't want to take up too much time today, but if any of you are really interested and want to get more of a deep dive of what happened during each of those negotiations, I've put up links here so that you can sort of go and take a look. This is a sort of news reporting site that will cover the negotiations. I'll be honest, my favorite part is seeing the pictures from the day. They sort of take these great pictures from every day, and you can see all of the negotiators at their different tables behind the flag, and that's kind of fun. So we've had 3 formal negotiations so far. All of them take place at the United Nations in New York. And you can see we're going along at a pretty good rate, about sort of every 6 months or so. And again, until COVID. But that really just means that we've got more of a chance to really organize ourselves and ensure that the final round of negotiations is a success. I will go into a little bit more detail though. So I think it's important to note that well, first of all, I've been calling it the High Seas and the High Seas Treaty. Another term that people will use to describe it is BB&J, which then you can, I don't know, make jokes about PB&J or all sorts of like weird acronyms. But BB&J stands for Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction. So if I ever accidentally slip up and start talking about BB&J, that's what I'm talking about. So it's interchangeably called the High Seas Treaty or the BB&J Treaty. Now, when the negotiators met, they agreed to a package of elements. And basically what they meant by that was that the treaty would have to include and have to address these 4 different elements in order to be a full and complete treaty. And these 4 elements are marine genetic resources. And so that's just thinking about, so for example, sort of the genetic material, the DNA. What if the DNA that is the cure for cancer is found in a sponge that's only found in the high seas? How should that be governed? Should it be a sort of first come, first serve, which is how fisheries are sort of managed, and whoever gets there first, great, you can patent that, all yours, no other obligation to share anything? Or should that be treated more like the common heritage to all mankind? because of course the high seas are a global common. They belong to all of us. And so since they belong to all of us, there's a lot of argument to be made that benefits there, including from sort of medical cures or whatever that are discovered from genetic materials, should be shared with humankind. So that's sort of what marine genetic resources, or MGRs, deals with. Then there's area-based management tools, including marine protected areas. This is one of the elements that Pew and the High Seas Alliance really focuses on, because this is the element that would enable us to establish marine protected areas on the high seas. At the moment, you can't do that. There's no legal tool to do that, which is crazy. That's 2/3 of the ocean that you can't actually really protect in a protected area. The High Seas Treaty is trying to change that. The third element is environmental impact assessments. This is the other one that the High Seas Alliance and Pew also really focus on in the negotiations. Because this is, again, if you're wanting to have some sort of, carry out any sort of activity in the high seas, you kind of want to make sure that it's not going to just like destroy the environment. Because again, this is an area that belongs to everyone. And so that means that whenever action you're taking, you're accountable to the global community. At the moment, not a lot of mechanisms that would require any activity to go through an environmental impact assessment to ensure that that sort of negative consequences are going to be mitigated, and that organizations are going to be, and users are going to be held accountable. So this is another really critical piece of the treaty. And then finally, the final piece of the package, the BB&J package, is capacity building and the transfer of marine technology. And this is, again, it sort of relates a little bit to the marine genetic resources piece, but it also is a standalone piece. And this is really wanting to make sure that, again, this is a global commons. This is an area that is for the global community. And so this piece of the package is wanting to make sure that the global community together is collectively capacitated and empowered to sort of use and explore and access these areas in the high seas, and that sort of any marine technology that's used or needed to get there is shared among the global community. And so there are a number of benefits, right, to this BB&J treaty is trying to, goals that this agreement is trying to achieve. So one, first and foremost, is to modernize high seas governance. The last time that a treaty for the high seas was sort of negotiated was in the early 90s, okay? And so it's been a long time since we've actually had a treaty that can reflect modern governance principles. This is a once-in-a-generation opportunity to really revolutionize how we manage the high seas. And then some of the other really key asks are pieces that relate to the package elements. So establishing marine protected areas on the high seas to help maximize the resilience of the ocean. And this is especially important in face of the multiple threats from climate change, ocean acidification, pollution, overfishing. We need a high seas treaty so that we can take the action that we need to address these global threats. And then another piece that's really we're hoping to achieve with the treaty, again, to assess and manage impacts of human activities so that we can maintain the integrity of ocean and of the ocean environment and hold users accountable. And then finally, we want to make sure that we're strengthening the coordination and cooperation among all of these different bodies that are managing just a little sliver of human activity on the high seas. We want to make sure that these are working together and thinking together, because if they continue to just do it in their own very siloed way, it's not going to be good for the ocean or for us humans. So where have youth been in this whole process? There are a lot of people, a lot of different groups, a lot of people attend these meetings. So in this top right corner, let's see, yep, top corner here, you see some people from the European Union. This is a group of negotiators from the Latin America region. This is friendly faces, some of whom you recognize from the High Seas Alliance, some from the Pacific. And while there are young people who are involved, there really haven't been sort of any organized voices of youth who've been coming, attending these meetings or really having a voice at the negotiations. And that's something that we want to change. We think, you know, we have one last meeting, one last shot. We want to make sure that the voice of youth is being heard, because what happens in this treaty is going to affect the ocean, not only now, but especially for future generations. And so just in summary, to remind folks, this is again the first negotiation process on the ocean issues in 20 years. It's a once in a generation chance to change the ocean. A comprehensive and global treaty can address the need for transformative change in the way we conserve and manage our biodiversity on the ocean. And this historic opportunity will also allow the international community to fulfill global commitments. There's been a big push to protect 30% of the ocean. You can't do that without the high seas. And then finally, 2021 is really the year to finalize the treaty. And we really, really feel strongly that the voice of youth needs to be heard in this final push for the negotiations. And so with that, I will thank you very much for your attention and looking forward to the questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicola and Lauren, both for your lovely presentations. I think they provided a great background of what the high seas are, what they entail, and what this new treaty wants to do, and why we need the youth to start speaking up and maybe pushing countries to be a bit stronger so we have a strong and robust treaty. So now we'll move into the Q&A discussion portion of the webinar. So firstly, I just want to ask participants if you guys have any questions for the presenters or about any of the topics that we just covered. And if you do, please just post them in the chat now or whenever they pop into your head. If we don't have any questions that are just at the top of your head right now, I do have a few questions for the presenters to hopefully just spur the discussion, and we'll go from there. But please, if you do have any questions, just post them in the chat. So not seeing any questions. Yeah, I recognize it is the weekend and we're just happy that you guys are here. And no one wants to do any work on the weekends, but yeah, we're glad you guys are here regardless. So I'll open up the question period and I'll direct this one towards you, Nicola. And it's kind of a two-part question. So why has it taken so long for the treaty to get to where we are? And when do we expect the treaty to be completed?
Great questions, Travis. Why so long? I feel like the frustrating answer is just because international treaty making takes time. And I think a part of it takes time, but to begin with, but then also we really haven't had the ambition that we need from world leaders to make this a priority item and a priority issue. They sort of, I joke that they spent, it was something like 8 years thinking about maybe talking about doing a formal treaty negotiation. So sort of how the process went was, maybe we should have a treaty to protect the high seas. And then they said, maybe we should meet more formally, but not too formally, to meet about the high seas. And those were the ad hoc informal working group years, which lasted about 6 years. And then after the ad hoc informal working group years, they said, you know what, maybe we should have a sort of a slightly more formal, but still not too formal set of rounds of meetings to talk about maybe a treaty, maybe a formal treaty, maybe starting negotiations. And so then we had 2 years of what they call preparatory committee meetings. And it was only after that, almost 16 years of maybe thinking about a treaty did formal negotiations start. But again, at any point along the way, this really could have been spurred, and it didn't have to take so long, because if we'd had more global leaders, more governments to sort of step up and make this a priority issue and urge, immediate action, and to sort of take that immediate action, I think this could have been spurred a lot more quickly. To your other question, though, when will we have a treaty? Hopefully in 2021. Fingers crossed. So the final meeting of negotiations is set to take place in 2021. But here's the thing, we still need that high ambition from global governments. They're not feeling the pressure that they need to have to finalize this treaty in 2021. And that's really where we're hoping, we need all hands on deck, right, to sort of convince governments that this is a key priority issue. And we need to finish the negotiations at this last round of meetings, which is set to take place in 21. So we're gonna say 2021, and the youth are gonna help us get it there.
Great answer, Nicola. Thank you. We do have a few questions coming in now, so thank you. Oh, wonderful. We have a bunch popping in. So from Sarah, so what are the incentives for the international community to participate in this treaty besides climate mitigation? How many nations signed this treaty? So I'll open the floor to any of the two presenters that would like to answer this.
I can start out Lauren, do you want to go?
Go for it, Nicola.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think that, of course, climate mitigation is one of the key concerns and issues of our time. But I also feel like to sort of really ensure that we're doing all of these climate mitigation measures that we need to take, you need to have some other tools in your toolbox, right? And the BB&J agreement would give people some more of those tools, like marine protected areas, right? Which is shown that there are a number of studies. I could even share them, I think, in the Q&A or the chat box. There are a couple of studies that talk about how marine reserves can help can help sort of be a really good source of climate mitigation. And again, 2/3 of the ocean, you don't have that tool. Similarly, for environmental impact assessments, thinking about what effect an activity will have on climate, right? You don't really have to answer for that. You don't have to be accountable for that at the moment if your activity is taking place on the high seas. This treaty would change that. So I think, you know, there are a lot of links that are linked to climate, but then also just for their own right. You know, protecting the high seas environment. There are a number of ecosystems that are really critical to functioning of the entire ocean, and that we actually depend on whether or not we know it. And so sort of protecting the overall function of the ocean is I think a pretty big incentive, and one that the BB&J agreement would hope to address. In terms of how many nations have signed the treaty, so at the moment none, but that's only because the treaty hasn't been finished yet. So they're actually still in the negotiation process, and we would hopefully have a signed treaty in 2021, like I mentioned. And we would want to get as many nations as we can to sign on. Now, that being said, I should mention that most nations have participated in the negotiation process. So I think, you know, between a lot of sort of your regional blocks that are big participants from the Pacific, Small Island developing states, Latin American countries, European Union, the African group, and then sort of, you know, United States, Canada, all of the bigger nations that don't necessarily fall in a regional group. So I'd say, I mean, it's pretty well attended and participated in terms of countries who are participating. Lauren, was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, I think you covered it really well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicola. And yeah, just one thing to note that all of these countries are participating, that even landlocked countries are participating in this as well. So you don't need to have an ocean coastline to be involved, because like Nicola and Lauren both said, the high seas are our global commons and they belong to everyone. So regardless if you have oceanfront along your country, you have a say in what is going on out there. So that's just a key thing to note. So moving on to the next one, and I think this question could be for you, Lauren. So how can we know the negotiations' concrete contents?
Yeah, that's a great question. So if you go to un.org/BBNJ, and we can put this link in the chat, but that's the UN's website for all documents and proposals related to the High Seas Treaty negotiations. So the latest draft treaty text is up there. I think the latest draft was posted in January, so you might have to scroll back a little bit. And also, I see Travis posted the link to highseasalliance.org, which is our coalition website, and we also track the negotiations. We do a tool called Treaty Tracker, which involves us furiously typing up notes while everyone's speaking, and then kind of synthesizing those and sharing those with the public to make sure people are informed on what different countries are advocating for within the negotiations, just to bring transparency and try and encourage more public engagement and public discourse within the treaty negotiations. So yeah, so just paying attention to all of those resources is a really good start to give you a sense of what the current state of play of the negotiations is.
Yeah, awesome, Lauren. Yeah, that's great. There's tons of websites that have it all, but yeah, un.org/BBNJ, or check out the High Seas Alliance website. And yeah, we have a ton of information on the treaty there if you want to figure it all out. And Nicola posted a lovely link to a paper about between marine reserves and climate mitigation and their links. So we do have another question. Oh, so great, you guys are sending in lots of questions here. So this one is for Nicola. So plastic is a very big issue. What would plastic regulation look like?
Great question, because yeah, definitely, plastic is such a huge issue, and especially now during COVID times with so many more, one-time use masks and other plastic waste, that's just adding to this issue. Plastics is a really complicated issue as well because, a lot of the sourcing actually takes place within, the national jurisdiction itself, right? But I think it really highlights how interlinked the high seas are to sort of the coasts, right? Because even though a number of a good source of sort of plastic waste comes from sort of land-based sources and eventually through coasts, it still impacts the high seas. It still makes its ways to the high seas. And then similarly, another source is just spills that have microplastics that are taking place during shipping over the course of the ocean, which again, shipping and ship waste is managed by one specific body. And so really, honestly, I think what the BBNJ agreement could do, because whoever asked this question, you did rightly note that plastic isn't its own sort of element in the package, right? But I think it could be considered under the environmental impact assessment package of the agreement, wanting to make sure that sort of activities that are taking place aren't going to be contributing to plastic pollution, for it as an example. But honestly, I think one of the big key things that the BBNJ agreement can do in terms of addressing plastic pollution is providing this comprehensive overlook of all of the activities that are taking place on the ocean and sort of helping to guide plastic mitigation efforts, right? So for example, there's so many different users and activities taking place on the high seas. They may not all be communicating and knowing what's going on with each other. BBNJ agreement can take a comprehensive view and sort of say, whoa, plastic pollution is coming from all of these different sources. And then, it may not be able to directly manage all of those different sources because that might be, managed by different individual governments, but they could at least have those governments talking together and sort of raising that it's an issue and sort of helping to provide a coordinated approach to address the plastics problem.
Yeah, that's great, Nicola. Thank you so much. Yeah, you highlighted it very well. So we have another question as well, and I'll let you both answer it, but I'll let Lauren go first. So if the treaty is accepted or ratified or approved, which specific working group or organization will be in charge to make sure countries are following it?
Yeah, so that's a really great question, and that is my answer might not be satisfying, but that's one of the things that will be decided within the treaty. So one of the big components of the treaty is figuring out what kind of institutional arrangements will be put in place to make sure that the treaty is being implemented and that countries are following it. So that could look like having a conference of parties that meets to review proposals for marine protected areas or environmental impact assessments. It could include a scientific committee to give recommendations to the conference of parties on different activities, on whether or not environmental impact assessments are good, on whether or not an activity should or should not proceed based on the impacts it might cause. So short answer is that that's all being decided, but I'll let Nicola add to that if you have any additional color.
That's great, Lauren. Yeah, and I that's exactly right, that it will be decided by the treaty. But I do think it's a good question to sort of clarify that, what we want to see, and actually what most countries want to see as well. Overwhelming majority of countries support that the BBNJ treaty, the High Seas Treaty, would actually create a new organization, right, that would sort of be in charge of running the of managing all of these different pieces of things. And so that new organization might have a slightly different shape. You know, like Lauren mentioned, that you might have a conference of parties that's sort of running it, but in short, it would create a new organization that would manage things. And, you know, certainly making sure that countries are held accountable for their actions, to make sure that they're agreeing, that they're actually doing what they agreed and signed up to do, as another key piece of that. And yeah, I mean, I think through some of the different elements, and we'll see exactly what the negotiators decide to put in the treaty itself. But one of the ways that we're hoping that they will sort of achieve this accountability is by including some sort of a compliance committee, which a number of other organizations have, which is just a committee to do just that, right? To review what different member countries are doing, and to make sure that they are indeed holding up their end of the bargain and abiding by the rules that they agreed to when they signed up to the treaty.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you both for those great answers. Yeah, and it's a great question. Compliance will play a huge role in the new treaty, making sure that countries are following it. So we do have another question. So, but it's what advice would you give to youths who want to engage more? And we will get. I'm not going to answer that right now because we're just going to get into that in the next segment. But I just want to open the floor again just to see if there's any final questions that people would like to pose before we just move on. Okay, so yeah, thank you guys. We'll move on, but thank you guys so much for the wonderful questions. We hope we answered them well for you all. So now we're going to move into what you guys can do to help move these negotiations forward. So I'm just going to share my screen real quickly. So we're all good? You can see my screen? Perfect. So yeah, now we'll move into our discussion on how youth can engage. But yeah, as I said, I just want to put up these few slides and make a few points to help spur the conversation. And initially, I want to say that the High Seas Alliance, we don't want to be the voice for youth within the negotiations. Instead, we want to empower you all and provide you with the resources and support to make your voices heard and create that effective change yourself. So how can youth play a role? And we kind of see it in three different ways. So what we need to do, and it has kind of been alluded to throughout the presentations, is that we need to increase the global profile of the negotiations. We need more people talking about it. That includes world leaders, that includes the public, so they feel the pressure to be bold, ambitious, and to complete the treaty in 2021. And there's many different ways of how we can increase the global profile of these negotiations, whether that be through a large communications campaign or a youth petition, or stuff like that. And then additionally, this is a bit more specific, but we need to raise the ambition of governments. So this could be done by supporting direct in-country work that specifically targets governments that might need to improve their positions. So they might be acting pretty negatively within the negotiations and want to keep the status quo of how things are managed. So we make the issue more visible and strengthening countries' commitments at the negotiations. And of course, there's a bunch of different ways that we can do targeted in-country work with youth. And then, so how do we do the above two, sort of? And then so that we see this kind of through capacity building and joint collaboration opportunities for youth and with youth organizations. So we kind of see this webinar as a nice capacity building opportunity to help bring you all up to speed with what's going on within the negotiations. So then you can actually just have a conversation about it with people or promote it or advocate for it as well. And also, what does that look like in addition? So that could mean by providing you guys with communications materials, hosting events with other youth organizations, providing you with blogs, letters to governments, etc. And so I just want to throw this out there as well before we move into the next section, but if your youth organization would be interested in doing something together, just let us know. We're totally open to finding new opportunities to collaborate and work together. So we do have a few opportunities that we've thrown together already for the High Seas Alliance that we will be pushing out in the coming months, and we just want to lay them out for you guys here. So first, we will be launching a High Seas Youth Ambassador Program, which is a one-year-long program where we will be looking for 5 to 10 youth who want to further engage in the High Seas Treaty process. Applications will be open come December with more details to be announced on our website, social media pages, and we can circulate the details through email once we have them as well. And then in addition, we will be making a High Seas video compilation. So we were looking for videos from you guys, short videos from youth entitled The High Seas and Me, where you can discuss the high seas, why they are important, why we need a new treaty, etc. The videos can be of you in an animation, it's still video, however you want it to make a video about the high seas. We're looking for creativity here. So yeah, and then there will be a grand prize actually for the best video of $500 USD. So hopefully that gives you guys a little bit of an incentive to send in us some great videos. And then in addition, more videos will be forthcoming as well on social media. And as with the Ambassador Program, we can email those out to you as well. And then lastly, we are working on a high seas toolkit, and this kind of ties into the capacity building point that I made on the last slide. And so we want to create this toolkit to give you guys the resources and the materials to create the effective change yourself. So within the toolkit, that'll include everything from social media tiles, suggested tweets and photos, infographics, talking points and messaging, letters to government and editors, petitions, blogs. So it's going to be a plethora of things that we hope will be able to help you guys. So with that being said, we would now like to just open the floor. We want to have a discussion with you guys to see on how you guys think you can engage. We'd like to hear from you what organizations you are from, what work you guys currently do, how does this or could this link to the high seas? Yeah, and in addition, I'd like to pose some other questions. What can youth do to help improve the end result of the treaty? And what can the High Seas Alliance do to help raise youth voices within the negotiations? So we have our own ideas of what we think we can do, but also we want to pose them to you guys if we might be missing something as well. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and I will open the floor. If you have a question or anything, a comment, you can raise your hand and I give the floor to you. Or you can post it in the chat function. And in addition, if you have any questions about the 3 opportunities that I just listed, now is the time to ask them as well. Okay. So we do have one, so thank you. How can we learn more about our high seas? So I'm going to give those to our presenters again as well. Nicola, I'll let you take the floor for this question. So it's just, how can we learn more about our high seas?
That's a great question, and I think it's easy to get overwhelmed. There's so many different resources where you can go. So I'm going to be a little bit cheeky and say that as a first stop, check out the High Seas Alliance website that Travis posted. There are a lot of great resources that are going to be there. I'll also post Hugh's, my own organization. We have a whole team dedicated to the high seas. We have a couple of resources that can be a good place to get you started. So I'll post the link in the chat box there as well. I mean, I personally enjoy, there are a number of videos, and maybe Travis and I can also send these in links. There are a couple of videos that just sort of get you started in terms of giving you a little bit of a comprehensive picture of what all is going on, what forces are at play going on there. So hopefully those few resources can get you started, but please also reach out to us if you want to know more, if you've checked out those resources and you have more questions, or you want to sort of learn more about a specific topic, get in touch with us, and we're happy to chat with you, or to send you a couple more links or papers that can hopefully get you the information you're looking for.
And I would also add to that, I know I speak for many of my colleagues when I say this, but I've been watching the Our Planet series on Netflix, which just came out last year, and there's a really great high seas episode. So if you want some beautiful cinematography, great sounding narration, and just really interesting and fun facts and about the high seas, I think it's episode 5 in that series. So I would also recommend checking that out, in addition to all of the great resources that Nicola pointed to.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. Yeah, those are great videos, actually. The Blue Planet High Seas episode is great. One of my favorites, a little bit biased, of course. But on top of that as well, they do have a deep sea one, which lots of the deep sea is in the high seas. Though that has some crazy organisms and creatures that you can find down there, that's also super cool. And yeah, the video is amazing. So yeah, thank you for that question. And then as you can see, Nicola and I did I posted a video, and Nicola posted a webpage which has a ton of resources for you guys to check out there if you're interested in finding more. So yeah, again, do we have another question? So we have a comment. Thank you for these great opportunities. They are all great. I think an important step is to establish dialogue with national governments as well. Any tips on how to reach people representing our respective countries in the negotiations? Which one of my two lovely presenters would love to take that question on? Lauren, I'll give that to you to start, and Nicola, you can follow up. Thank you.
Sure. So so most of the negotiations are happening at the United Nations in New York, and a lot of the people who are negotiating are the people at the UN, their country's mission to the UN, and those email addresses you can find online. So if you type in whatever country you're from, UN mission, you can generally find that email address, and could even just send them an email. There are also petitions. So we're partnering with the World Surf League on a petition to protect 30% of the ocean, which isn't necessarily exactly the same thing as the High Seas Treaty, but we need the High Seas Treaty to be able to protect 30% of the ocean. So if you go to weareoneocean.org, you can sign the petition there, and that automatically, you say where you're from, and that petition is set up to directly email your UN representative. And yeah, just finding out who's on your delegation. So in Nicola's presentation, she had the photos of the newsletters that are published during the negotiating session, so you can kind of see who's speaking, what ministry they're from, and then organizing is really powerful. So the more you can show that there's a big group of people watching what they're doing and that care about making sure the treaty's as strong as possible and has robust conservation safeguards within it, the better. So yeah, I find it hard because I don't like being annoying, but that's kind of the way that you make change, just being annoying and constantly just letting people know that you're paying attention, you're watching what they're doing. So just, yeah, keep that in mind, and don't be afraid to get your voice out there.
Yeah, we've got a phrase, the squeaky wheel gets the grease or the oil or whatever. And I will say also that we do hear a lot actually from these government negotiators that they want to hear from youth. And so yeah, I would say if you want to speak to the sort of the person who is representing your country at these negotiations, you can also just email us, let us know. We'll tell you. We can tell you, who the person is, and it could be that's a lot of these countries we're trying to talk to ourselves, and so would be happy to to loop you in on those conversations so that you can, the negotiators can hear directly from you.
Yeah, great. And yeah, just one thing to add to it is that within your country, within your own governments, you have ministers that may not be directly involved with this, but they set the policy for your country's position. So on top, we have UN negotiators that are great to reach out to, but at the same time, there's your Minister of Fisheries, your Minister of Foreign Affairs, a Minister of Environment that are setting the policies and your positions for this. So, and those emails are probably all available online on your government's websites. So it's totally okay to send them an email to be like, hey, I'm a youth. I realize this is going on. What is our country doing to make sure that we have a strong high seas treaty? And with the toolkit that we'll be releasing soon, there will be pre-drafted emails that you guys just kind of have to fill in your name and your country name and then send those along. So it makes it super easy. So yeah, stay tuned for stuff like that. So yeah, and we have two other questions that we will answer. And then if you have any others, put them in now because we are running up on the hour and I don't want to go over. But so can I get participated in programs like this again? I really want to learn more. So I'd like to know, are there any plans there are? So I'll just answer that one as well. And yeah, as part of the High Seas Alliance, we're working to engage youth voices within negotiations more. So we have your guys' emails. We'll be sending you guys a bunch of stuff. But also on top of that, I'd recommend just following us on social media, the High Seas Alliance, and then we'll be tweeting out all the time a bunch of different opportunities and materials, and it'll keep you guys all up to date on what's going on within the negotiations, what countries are saying, and opportunities for you guys to engage. Nicola or Lauren, is there anything you want to add to that as well? No?
Nope, just keep your eye on your inbox.
Yeah, wonderful.
And I also I put my email and Twitter on this chat. So if I don't know, Travis and Lauren, if you want to do the same, so that then this group can get in touch with us. But yes, we'll be emailing you too, just with a follow-up to this.
Yeah, wonderful. So we have two more questions. So I'm part of Youngo, Ocean's Voice, and right before this meeting, we were actually planning to have a new podcast and just thought we should definitely have one of the high seas. I'll look forward to getting information from the pages of you guys just sent. So yeah, that sounds amazing, and we're more than happy to talk about it whenever. So please reach out to us if that does come to fruition, and we'd be more than happy to collaborate. And so we have one final question, and we'll end with that, and then we'll wrap up. So I am an heir with Heirs to Our Ocean, and I am on the UN Ocean Decade Youth Advisory Council. I was wondering if the treaty will be working with the Ocean Decade. So Nicola, I'm going to give that to you to start. So thank you.
Sure. Yeah. So fabulous that the Ocean Decade is starting and that you're involved with it, because I think it is such an important effort over these next 10 years to make sure that we get ocean science, right? There's so much about the high seas that we still don't know and need to learn about. And so while the two processes aren't really formally working together necessarily, a lot of people who are involved in the High Seas Treaty are also involved in the Decade of Ocean Science. And I really think that the two can work together, because I think a lot of pieces of the High Seas Treaty can sort of be built so that they are fostering new science to be discovered and made, and empowering new scientists to get out there and learn and share information about the high seas. And so in that respect, we definitely, and we also hope that what information is learned from the Decade of Ocean Science work can sort of help inform to make sure that we're protecting and using the high seas in a sort of smart, scientifically informed way.
Yeah, thank you, Nicola. That's great. And what better place where we need more science than in the high seas, right? Where it's hard to get out there. It's hard to do the science. We don't know everything. So yeah, that's a huge part of the UN Decade of Ocean Science. So we're 1 minute over. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up. But we'd like to thank you all for joining us today for our High Seas webinar. For those who could not join, as we said, we have recorded the webinar and we will be circulating it to you all. So please feel free to share to whoever you think might be interested in this. And stay tuned for future updates from the Alliance. And if you have any brilliant ideas yourself on how to further engage youth voices in the treaty negotiations, please don't hesitate to to contact us. So thank you guys very much, especially for joining us on a Saturday. And we hope you all have a lovely rest of your weekend. So thank you all very much. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye-bye now.